Welcome to the Power of Peacefulness podcast. We're all about bringing peace into your life. If you like this podcast, do me a favor, give it a thumbs up. And if you need some extra help, go ahead and download my free resource. You can find that at SharonMcLaughlinMD/workbook. It's a workbook all about peacefulness. So if you need some peace in your life, try the workbook. All right, let's get started. Hey, everybody. Today we have Dr. Anissa Hansen with us. She is going to be talking to us about calming our inner anxiety. Dr. Hansen is a Ph.D. She's a therapist and also a therapeutic coach. Thrilled to have you here. Anxiety, unfortunately, is huge in our society. I know I suffer. I've suffered from the time I was a child. So this is an honor to have you here to come and speak about this and share your expertise with.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. It's an honor.
Okay. So today we are going to be talking about inner anxiety. Tell me, I always like to go back. How do we get started? How did you get started with anxiety? Was this something that you yourself are afflicted with? Parents, friends, family?
Yes, for sure. Just like you were saying, as for many, many years. And, I grew up in the late 80s and the 90s. And, I'm sure you were aware, like anxiety and these, it wasn't a thing. It wasn't a thing.
It wasn't.
And I think as a highly sensitive child, I mean, I know these things now, like being in the world of being a therapist and being attuned in all these ways. I didn't understand how sensitive I was to the world. And also my parents, they didn't know. They were kind of just surviving and so my body manifested stress in a physical form. And I would have these ulcers, like at a young age. I remember being in like second grade and having these intense like ulcers and physical symptoms and shaking and dizziness. Now I know that was stress, manifesting, anxiety manifesting, of not knowing how to be in the world. I didn't have any coping skills. I didn't know how to breathe. I didn't know how to have mindset shifts. And so my parents just saw these symptoms as like, oh, there's something wrong with her that we have to fix it. There's an ailment. So I went for many years. I went to all these specialists, quote unquote, they're really great in their field, but no one asked about my stress or my home life, or no one asked about the emotional stuff. It was all like physical. We did blood work. I did, brain scans. I did an endoscopy. I did all these things. I couldn't find anything. And I was working with this one specialist, and since he couldn't find anything, he concluded that I was making it up. And as a child, when you have somebody that's, an expert in their field and a grown adult, and you're this little person, you're like, I'm having this experience, but he's telling me I'm making it up to get attention. That started to become really weird. And I remember being young and remember feeling like, oh, I have to start hiding this. It's not safe to share anymore. And like going to all these like really, these white coat, all these degrees and all these things. And I started telling my mom I started feeling better, which I didn't feel better. But they were kind of like, we can keep running tests. We can try all these medications. It was kind of just like throwing stuff at me at that point. And I remember at this point, probably like third or fourth grade. And I remember then thinking, this isn't going to go well if I keep staying in the traditional medical model. And back then, mental health and looking at the family dynamics and looking at the stress on the child was not a thing. It was not one person out of the many, many people I saw ever asked me about any of this stuff, or my parents. And so I was like, started to be like, well, I know that I'm going to keep going to these people and it's going to trend in this direction. I don't want to be a guinea pig. And so I just started acting like things were okay. And so believing like maybe if there's something really wrong with me and it's not okay to share. And so that kind of manifested over the years. And I kind of got through, into like adolescence, teenage years. But I always felt like the shame and the anxiety started to like build. And so like the separateness of others, like I have this thing. And it wasn't until I got into like grad school, because I went into undergrad for psychology just because I like it. And I think I was always attuned to other people's stories and experiences naturally. And I was always drawn to that. And I think of being so sensitive, I like could be more empathetic of other people's experience. And I was like, wow, I can do this as a job. That's cool. And then it wasn't until I got into graduate school that I was like, the mirror started to turn of like, oh, maybe this is what was happening. And, we were talking about, case studies and stuff and like, oh, that's kind of what happened to me. Or maybe I was under a lot of stress. My parents are great people, but, they were under a lot of financial stress. A lot of, I kind of was their therapist as a child, and their marriage was, you know, somewhat volatile, not in a physical sense, but an emotional sense. They didn't have the skills. There was a lot of yelling and screaming, and, you know, trying to survive in that dynamic really compounded my own stuff. And so doing my own therapy and trying all these other things over the years really helped me be like, wow, there's so much going on here. And LA helps. My story helps a lot of people, and people that come to me, have a similar story of like, I've had this my whole life, and I went to all these professionals and experts, and no one really got it. And so I think even though that was unfortunate, I had that experience. It's really helped me like attune to people in a deeper way. Yeah.
I feel like our background story always plays today and how it could be helpful for others when we share our message, and also the experiences that we lived, being able to bring that into a relationship or dynamic with one of our
And
clients or
also,
patients.
yes. And I think in my early 20s, I manifest in relationships and very chaotic. It's all this stuff. Like you are, there's a storm going on inside. You don't know how to calm yourself. And so your attachment and all these things are affected by that. Then you're drawn to people that are similar, but you're unconscious to it. And so I was in a lot of dysfunctional relationships, really reactive relationships. Like I couldn't understand how to have like authentic connection, and just this overachievement too of like, I have to be perfect. I have to get this degree. I have to look a certain, it just started compounding. And then I got to a place where I kind of like, this is not sustainable. And I have to look inward and working on the self-compassion and all these things. Like you were part of the story of like, you kind of have to break all these parts down of like what our society kind of, you have to be perfect. You have to do all these things. And then what happens if you do it all and you still, it's not working, then what? Then you got to do it different.
Let's move on to helping people with anxiety. For those who are listening out there, right? You tuned in because you saw that in the title and you wanted to listen to it. We were speaking before the podcast started recording as far as anxiety being a gift. Now, some of us that may be hard for us to understand. So elaborate on that, because when you said that, I was like, wow, that's a very interesting angle to look at anxiety.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the most fun gift, right? It's not. But over the years, it's really, I shipped my relationship with the anxiety and the stress, because what happens is we're trying to fight against it. I don't want this. This shouldn't be here. There's something wrong with me. And I started tuning towards of like, what is my anxiety, or what are these things trying to tell me? It's almost like a messenger within the body, within ourselves, bubbling up to the surface, sending little messages of like, is this really aligned with who you are and what you want to be doing? And that's why I like to call it a gift, because it's like, it's not a gift that everybody wants to have, but if we can look at it, it's like, what is it trying to tell me? What is it trying to communicate? What are parts of me that I'm not looking at? What are parts of me I'm disconnected from? So I can stop fighting it. Like it's not there to torture me. There's a part of me where this is coming from. It's not just coming out of nowhere. And so looking at it from that place of like being curious and expanding on it, which I think is much more helpful.
I like that idea. I know sometimes those of us who are familiar with anxiety, too familiar, it's like our default network. How do we approach something? We approach it with anxiety. Like we just fall back on anxiety all the time.
Yeah. And I think too, we're in this resurgence of this mental health era where, we go on social media and Instagram, TikTok, that there's so much information. And I think now everyone's trying to like heal their anxiety, and it can actually create more anxiety of like, okay, I should be in a place where this should be gone. And so especially like overachieving women and men of like it actually create more anxiety. And also looking at it's not all bad because sometimes our anxiety is a motivator, right? It's kind of like the cortisol turns on. It's like, "Oop, you got to be awake and aware." And that can be really good when you're trying to get something done or you're trying to do something challenging. But what happens when it doesn't turn off? And that's what we get stuck in. And that's where the burnout and the adrenal fatigue and the panic starts showing up, is when we don't know how to turn it off, and we don't know how to reset that and use it in a way to work for us. We can kind of just be walking around like a shell of ourselves.
Talk to us as far as how do we calm the anxiety? Any tips there?
Yes, of course. Well, it's not kind of like a quick fix because a
No.
lot of I wish I've been looking for a quick fix for, 20, 30 years. But it is calmable when you look at it from a place that it's not, your enemy, and working on how to bring it in. And also the panic and the anxiety that we experience is very old. A lot of it is very old and it gets stored in the body. From my understanding and what I've dived into is the cells. There's cells and your nervous system and your muscles and your energetic states. All these things absorb the panic. So when it happens, it feels very real. And a lot of the time, the experience you have in the moment, you have these anxious triggers or reactions. It's not about what's happening in the moment. And understanding, how do I work on calming the body? How do I work on slowing it down, being with my nervous system, which is not, our culture doesn't do this, just like do more. But it's working on being curious of, do I spend time slowing down? Do I spend time sitting with myself? What does my breath look like? Right? Do I even know how to sit still, even for 5 minutes?
Yeah.
And so I start working with people of like how the panic actually manifests in the body is very physical, not just in your up here. It's everything is affected by it. And I work with a lot of women that can't even sit for 5 minutes. And so that's where we start. Being in your body, right? Of like focusing on the breath, slowing it down, doing some gentle journaling or whatever it is, or like mindful walking. What came up when you sat for 2 minutes of like, there's so much, the bubbling. What, I have to do more. I have to do more. So that's where it starts of like, isn't that interesting? I can't even sit for 2 minutes. And then we kind of poke holes in that. So I recommend people just start with 1 minute of like, give yourself permission to sit. Nothing's going to fall apart in a minute. 1 minute's like 10 breaths. And then from there, kind of like observing it, and it's kind of like chipping away. That's where I like to start with people. It's just like slowing it down.
It's so true. For the longest time, and it's hard for me to just sit. It's hard for many people that I know just to sit. And then
Me too.
sometimes I find, years ago, one of my friends had said to me, "Oh, she watches the Hallmark movies." I'm like, "Hallmark movies?" I'm like, "They're like mindless. Why would you do that? Why would you spend your time doing that?" But I found recently, like in the last year or so, actually, I like them a lot. And I think a lot of people do. That's why they're really top rated, right? And so many people tune into them, especially around the holidays. And when there's a new
Yes.
one coming out, they're like, "Oh," but I think that's it. Like we really do aspire to having some quietness in our lives, but we don't always know how to do it. So sitting down in front of the TV on a show that's not gonna like where you're gonna cringe because someone's gonna get killed and they're playing that spooky music, or there's a lot of fighting or anything to trigger you. Just very calming, a nice story that it's always a happy ending. Oh, I've actually found that this, can help me a lot just when I need to calm down. I do walk every day. I make sure I get out, I walk, I listen to podcasts. But as far as evening at the end of the day, like how I could, quiet myself, a lot of times it's reading,
Yes. Yes.
but
Which is
occasionally it's that movie, and it helps. It just helps not to do anything.
and I talk about this a lot with my clients, is that a lot of the stuff we do is subconscious. So what you're listening to, what you're seeing, and in our culture, we normalize dysfunction. A lot of the stuff we see on TV, it's like the shows are getting more
Yeah.
tantalizing and more dramatic because our baseline is becoming higher of what we think entertainment is. So the Hallmark movies or these things are really like benign, but it's like we are now addicted to almost the drama. And so also the social media of like, okay, I have 5 minutes, get on my phone, right? Get the information, what in more like stimulus and drama. And so we've been normalizing dysfunction and not knowing we're doing that. And so even at the end of the day, where I tell people the first 5 minutes of the day, your brain is the most susceptible, right? What messages do you want to get it? And most of us pick the phone up right away. We wake up, we pick the phone up, and like the messaging, the world is bad, my life is bad, And at the end of the day, I try to do no phone zones. Even it's like put the phone up, watch your little show, and then you can take it. But these little things make a difference because they're messaging and it goes into the deep subconsciousness of just like, go on a walk without your phone. People are like, what? What if something happens? I'm like,
Right.
You're going to be okay. It's for 10 minutes. But the panic, if I'm not, if I'm not in the loop all the time, if I'm 5 minutes away from something and something happens, it's like, wow, we really normalize panic and not knowing that we're doing that. Especially for women that have to be feel like available to everybody and everything all the time.
How do people get a hold of you if they want to work with you, Dr. Hansen?
Sure, they can reach me at my website, which is anissahansen.com. On Instagram, I have some great free videos and content on there at Anissa Hansen. And if anyone's interested in kind of what I'm saying, I want to work together, I offer a complimentary phone call so you can sign up online for a quick little call and see if it's a good fit for you to help
It's been a
out.
pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for helping us calm our anxiety.
My pleasure. Anytime.